Hey everyone! Today we're going to analyze a few positions from one of my favorite players, former world champion Veselin Topalov, who is a very creative and aggressive player, and the idea that we see today is a piece sacrifice played in the opening to weaken the opponent's king. This is definitely an advanced idea, but let's study these complex positions to learn some ideas from them. So here in this position, Topalov is playing against another former world champion, Viswanathan Anand. Here Anand went for the move h6. Let's try to understand what goes on here. Here there's a pawn on d5 that could be captured, but white is definitely playing for activity here. For example, after knight takes, white will castle long, and white is going to get very quick development, bring a rook to e1, so this position is actually very dangerous for black to play. First of all, black cannot castle short because queen takes h7 would be a checkmate, so it's actually difficult to do something useful in this position. For example, after knight to d7, bishop to c4, will increase the pressure, all of white's pieces are active, so this position is already very bad for black. Probably the safest here for black was to castle short. In that case, white will probably castle long and we will get a very short fight. But in the game, Anand went for the move h6. I'm not sure if he was expecting white to retreat with the knight, because against Topalov, this move could be expected. Here white played the very nice knight takes f7. And after king takes, so for just one pawn, white is actually gonna get very good compensation because black's king is gonna be very exposed. There are several ideas like knight to e5, followed by queen to g6 to attack the king. So it is actually very hard for black to play this position. And the best way to illustrate this is how white played. White played actually very solid moves. Here he first castled long. Knight to e5 was an option, but castling is also a very useful move. Here Anand went bishop to d6, preventing some knight to e5 ideas, but Topalov found another way with knight to h4, queen to g6 and knight to f5 will be always in the air. For example, if black goes rook to e8, white can give a check, and after a move like king to g8, white has a few options like knight to f5, bishop takes, even bishop to c3, increasing the pressure. So Anand went bishop to c8, trying to cover some knight to f5 ideas. Now again Topalov simply improved his pieces with rook to e1, and after knight to a6, here comes another very nice move, rook to e6. The point is that if black takes, after d takes, white will also get the knight on a6. That's why Anand went knight to b4, and after bishop takes and pawn takes, Topalov insisted with the sacrifices. He went bishop to c4. Now this position is just very hard to play as black, even though white is sacrificing everything. Here Anand went b5, which was probably a good idea, but with the wrong execution. Just to show you how complicated this position is, the best way for black to go here is king to g8 and trying to hold the position, which feels a bit hard to play. Instead, after b5, Topalov took the pawn. Here Anand went bishop to e7. If black takes on e6, even though black is a full rook up, white will follow up with rook to e1, and this king is actually very badly placed. Instead, after bishop to e7, Topalov went knight to g6, and after knight takes d5, here Topalov went for a forcing line after rook takes e7, knight takes, bishop to c4, and after king to f6 and knight takes, here Anand tried queen to d4. If black takes on h8 after rook to d1, white has way too many pieces to attack the king, so black's king is not going to last long. For example, after knight to f5, covering d6, queen to e4 is also quite strong, attacking the rook and also planning to go queen to c6. Instead here Anand tried the interesting queen to d4, planning queen to a1, but here Topalov simply went rook to d1, and after queen to a1, king to d2, queen to d4 and king to e1, black got a few checks, but after queen to e5, queen to e2, we got a queen trade, but in the end white is still a pawn up with a much better position, so white won this game without too much trouble. And before I move on to the next position, if you want to seriously improve at chess, I have a free course that will provide you with a training plan for that, so feel free to check the link in the description. So in the next position, white is a pawn down, but white has very nice central pawns, so white has compensation for the pawn, and white could play even something like knight takes c7, but instead Topalov, he went for the creative alternative and he went knight takes f7. And after king takes, the idea is to follow up with e5, attacking the knight, and after knight to d5, knight to e4. So in return for the piece, this is a full piece that is being sacrificed. First of all, white has a concrete threat, which is knight to d6, forking the king and the bishop, but there might also be ideas to attack the king with the move f4. So again, the position remains balanced as in the previous example, but it's a lot easier to play as white. Here Kramnik tried king to e7, and after knight to d6, queen to b6, Now Topalov went bishop to g4, increasing the pressure on e6. We see also an advantage of the sacrifice. Now the pawn e6 might be a target without the pawn f7. And black's position is already very hard to play. The best alternative given by the engine is the move h5 to deflect the bishop from this diagonal. Instead, Kramnik played a very natural move, rook a to f8, trying to activate the rook. Topalov went queen to c2. This is actually a very strong idea and very hard to prevent, which is the move queen to g6, forking the bishop and the pawn. Here Kramnik took on d4. The best alternative was to play passively, which is very hard to do sometimes, which is to go rook h to g8, defending the bishop, and after queen to g6, go knight to c7, defending the pawn. Although here white has very good play, after a move like queen to e4, the move f4 will come later on. White has a lot of activity for the sacrifice piece. Instead here Kramnik went queen takes d4. It is hard to blame him, he's looking for counterplay. And after queen to g6, his idea was to take on g4, although here white will get the piece back after queen takes, king to d8, and knight takes b7, king to c8, so now white got the piece back with a much better position. Here Topalov didn't move the knight on b7, he went for the aggressive option as usual, a4, planning to activate the rook. If king takes, white will simply take the knight on d7, so Kramnik tried b4, and after rook to c1, c3, trying to close the c-file, and after b takes and b3, Topalov went c4 attacking the knight. Kramnik tried to counterattack with rook to g8, and after knight to d6, king to c7, and queen to f7, Kramnik went rook to f8. In this position the simple move h3, counterattacking the queen, was good enough to win the game. The point is that if the queen moves, white will simply take on e6, and after rook takes and pawn takes, this is a clearly better position for white. But here Topalov, as usual, went for the spectacular line. He sacrificed the queen after c takes d5, and after rook takes and rook takes, king to b8, knight takes. Here Kramnik went rook to e8. There was a computer-like solution with the move queen to e2 for black, holding the position. The point is that after knight takes, black had the very spectacular queen takes, and after b2, this pawn will promote, but this was just very hard to find. But after rook to e8, knight to d6, rook to h8, and rook to c4, attacking the queen, now this position is clearly better for white. After queen to e2, white took the pawn on e6, and this pawn is actually now being controlled. After knight to b6 and rook to b4, king to a8, e7, we got a trade of pawns. But after rook f to b1, knight to d5, h3, giving some air for the king. Now this pass pawn will advance, so white has even a material advantage. White has a rook, a bishop and 2 pawns for the queen, and a much better position. So white managed to win this game without too much trouble. So hope that you like these very wide sacrifices. So sometimes giving a minor piece for having a much better king is a very interesting idea. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.